Hi.
Not yet.
I'm Angified.
Not yet, Tone. Hold on.
I started Angified Presents.
Tony. Hang on, not yet. I gotta set this description up. Fatal. Oh, yeah, it's Thursday, everyone. It's time to talk some shh. IT.
Hi. I'm Angified. I started Angified Presents.
We share the love of music.
It has been medicine and therapy. Nothing else worked.
It has saved many of us. With mental health, we need to open our eyes.
Hurt people hurt people.
We ask that you listen, comprehend, and relate with your ears.
Form that heart of unity and one.
We share on this stage.
Statistics, feelings.
And ourselves.
We stand with the belief to be you, to be heard, and to be original.
We all may be different, with opinions and beliefs.
At the end of the day, we are all brothers and sisters.
We are family.
We ask that you join us in a magical journey with artists from around the world. Open your minds, let in the love,
and listen with your hearts.
We all want a better tomorrow. Be one.
Communicate and look out for one another. And then, and only then, will you find the world.
We will find peace in all the world.
You'll find the world. And you will find this shining world. Heroes among us us and every boy and girl. Many have been broken, red hearts turn black. Love will melt the ice and turn it back, and you will find the world. You will find the world. You will find the world. And when you find a place called home, where everyone is free to roam, a whole new world, a better place for our children's futures at stake. And you'll find with music in your soul, laughter in your hearts. Together we can grow a better place with love in us all. And you will find together we can save it all. And you will find a place called home, where everyone is free to roam, a better place, a whole new world for our children's futures at stake. We'll find, you'll just open up your hearts, and you will find the world. And you'll find this trying world, heroes among us and every boy and girl, a better place for our children's sake. And you'll find the world.
We cover digital audio workstations and music tools. We explore theory, gear, and MIDI too. How to arrange, compose, and the art of arranging. Taking a look at AI and how the times have changed. On a PC or a Mac and even with a mobile device, we'll be talking about it all every Thursday night. From software to plugins and synths that entice. Dive deep into tech and let creativity take flight. Talkin' IT. We're talking IT. Come and join in and have some fun. It's highly educational with a lot to learn. From bedroom producers to seasoned pros, we're breaking it down so knowledge grows. Whether you're a DJ or a beat making wizard, we got the tips and tricks to make your sound sizzle. Mixing and mastering, that's our jam. With the tutorials and tips on how much RAM. Get the best quality from your setup and gear. Tune in every week and lend us your ear. We're talking IT. Come and join in and have some fun. It's highly educational with a lot to learn.
32 artists from different genres, from all corners of the globe. We're internationally known. Do it. Don't be scared. It's just a wag, baby.
Guess what? We're full, baby. The wag is going to go down now. It is. We have our 32 picked, chosen, and told. Welcome to the wag.
Four, three, two, one.
32 artists from different genres, from all corners of the globe. We're internationally known.
Show up and he'll take care of the rest.
Don't be scared. It's just a wag, baby.
We're doing styrofoam for participants and for the judges. We are only doing 32 waggers this time. We're cutting it back. So you make pace that cut, then you gotta make a pace first, right?
Are you signed up yet? Do it. Don't be scared. It's just a wag, baby. Do it. Don't be scared. It's just a wag, baby.
What say you 32 only. Sign up. ASAP.
What's a genre?
And what's a genre?
Genre hoedown. No. It's what's a genre showdown.
Sign up. A styrofoam for participants and for the judges. We're going to do this right this time.
Everybody wants to join. Everybody wants to join the What's Your Genre Showdown. Everybody wants to join. Everybody wants to join the What's Your Genre Showdown.
And it's Thursday night again.
Thursday.
And there's Glenn.
Once again. Just like that.
I need a record to scratch.
Sure. We can get a sound for that. I got a couple buttons over here, but one of them isn't that. So we'll figure it out.
Gotta scratch a record. There's no way to simulate it.
For now, we'll do one of those. Close enough. It's Thursday.
Now, I don't know if everybody caught it on Saturday or if they missed it. If not, there is an encore of it over on Angie's YouTube, as well as the What's a Genre Showdown's YouTube channel. And basically on Saturday, we finished round one. We figured out who was moving forward, and we're getting ready for round two. So tonight, what we're going to be looking at is the new genres that got added. There's some interesting ones, a little more advanced than the round one genres. And these definitely do need a little bit of talking and introduction as to, what they are. We've looked at them in the past. And in some cases, I even went back to a video that was so good at explaining jazz that I couldn't help but include it, because it does a great job of explaining it for both the listeners and for those who are trying to make the music. And I've also got one special video we're going to start with tonight. That's just some news on a plugin that we've talked about in the past, and it's really big news and some really cool things. So we'll take a look at that as well. Before we get started, I'm gonna show the mashups that came out of Saturday and what we're going to be talking about tonight. So when Rusty did the picking after we saw the round one winners, which were some fantastic tracks, everybody should go take a listen. There's a few of them in there that completely floored all the judges, specifically the country and the blues categories came out with some incredible entries.
Yeah.
So for the round two mashups, um, there's four, and the first one is going to be Starmy and 100 milligrams, and they're going to be going against Pinky Chew and RJS for punk. So punk got added into the genres, and can't wait to see what comes out of that one. It's going to be a fun one.
It's going to be nice.
Yeah. And for mashup two, we got Rolo and Dat Don P versus Maria Perdomo and the Unfantastic. And they're going to be doing pop, which was another one that Rusty had considered putting at the beginning in round one, but they kind of wanted to start with the hip hop because there was, so many hip hop contestants that now we're sliding the pop in and we get to get a little bouncy.
Sure. Change things up a little bit.
Yep. For the third mashup, which this is the one I'm looking the most forward to, in the last series last summer, some incredible stuff came out of jazz. I even got lucky enough to be involved in that round with the one who ended up winning the whole competition last summer with the jazz entry. So that's going to be Leslie Parker and EJM Beats going against Static and Matt JH. And this one's got interesting dynamics. They're all kind of new to the jazz thing. So this one's going to be a great learning lesson for all of them.
Nice. Yeah, jazz is one of those things that if you don't normally do a whole lot of jazz, it can be intimidating, but at the same time, it can be very rewarding when you do get something, when something does come out and it sounds jazzy and you did it, you're like, yes, that was awesome.
Yeah. I actually learned a lot doing it on the last one. So, and for the last mashup, this is the first time I think that they've managed to get grunge into the WAG showdown. So there was a lot of requests for it. A lot of people were anxious to see a genre like this get included. So Scott Baseface and Remo are going to be going against Mavi Hendricks and Christine Rebecca Sweet, and they're going to have to come up with something grungy.
Nice. A little grungy.
Yeah. Now, as for tonight's videos, as we go through them, some of these have some really interesting, because when I go to search for these things, especially when it comes to things like what are the ingredients, what makes up these certain genres, and I really try to search in different ways to see what kind of results I get on YouTube. And certain genres, you sometimes can't find anything specific about the elements. What's the time signatures? What's the scales? Those are the kinds of things I'm actually the most curious about. But a lot of times, what you find is the history of, and oh, these are good examples, and here's the bands, and things like that. Or you'll find an artist who shows you how to make a song in a genre, but they really just go through the motions and make a song in a video. So I really was trying to find those ones that would help to steer the contestants towards some ideas. Think about like the criteria that they're trying to go after. Now they're more familiar with the criteria the judges are using. So hopefully they give it some thought. They, things like originality, creativity, presentation, technical skills, Those are the kinds of criteria that the judges are looking for. So these are things you're going to want to keep in mind.
Right. One call out I would make for elements of what makes up a certain style would be videos from, like, we'd seen a few from Nare Soul, for example, when she was diving into whether it was bebop or whether it was the blues or whatever. She's a classically trained pianist. And then for her to dive into one of these other genres, she really did give a good example, for example, of what the elements were. And when she was playing a piece that she wrote in a certain style, she would have like pop-up video, like popping up on screen, telling you like which elements were, like when she was doing a piece in the style of Beethoven, like what elements were the style of Beethoven, whether it was, arpeggios, or whether it was, the fifths, or whether it was this, like all the different little pieces just popping up the whole time. So without being a whole essay on it, like she was able to, get a lot of information across just based on what pieces she was using and which elements she was putting together to make a
Yeah,
sound.
I loved her pop-up approach because it didn't take away from listening to what you had to, but at the same time, it helped to emphasize the certain qualities, especially when you're talking classical composers, every one of those classical composers has elements that stands out for them. And she's such a great music historian that she managed to like reinforce it while getting to enjoy the music itself. I wish all these videos would take a more of an approach like that, an unobtrusive way of highlighting what you need to pay attention to without stopping paying attention to it.
Exactly. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because that is one of the things that I thought was great about, if you're trying to learn a certain style. Like, she doesn't have videos for all the different styles, but the ones that she does have, you can really learn a lot about those particular styles and about the types of things to look for with any other styles, even that you're going to be going into. Like, you might not even know what to look for in a, what's between a pop and a grunge and a rock, like what are the defining elements. And there are certain things you could come up with, whether it's just a certain energy or whether it's a certain, chord change or whatever. There's certain things that you could associate with certain styles. And that's kind of what we're trying to get to, like boil it down to the nuggets of what exactly is, each of these, to help people get their, get their pieces, get their vision across.
If I can ever convince Rusty to get classical into the WAG, you can bet your ass Nari will be in there explaining what classical is.
Sure, absolutely.
She is good at it.
Yes.
So the video that I was mentioning that we're going to start with is just a little bit of news before we get into the genres and everything else. Back on this Sunday, February 16th, which was like a little birthday present to me.
Nice. Happy birthday.
MIDI Guitar 3, which we've talked about MIDI Guitar 2. We've looked at different ways of getting guitar to MIDI, and whether it's from a pickup or in this case, like utilizing plugins or software to do it. The software approach has gotten amazingly good over the years, and this is one of the solutions that really gets rave reviews. And Sunday they came out with a major beta test upgrade that they're now putting out there for those who want to beta test it. Mavi ran last night. We went and checked it out, and he's going to be playing around with it, letting them know, what he thinks. And they couldn't ask for a better beta tester because he's going to test the hell out of it. The features that they've added with this new upgrade are incredible. You're going to see some options here that not only are going to make guitarists start to drool about, like, being able to down tune and do alternate tuning without having to mess with your actual guitar, and be able to switch tunings on the fly. Not to mention, it's not just targeted to guitars. At this point, they've got special editions of it for cello, violin, bass. So anybody out there who's playing, you know, these stringed instruments and wants to start to trigger MIDI and get good control of what they're doing converted over to MIDI, this plugin is really becoming an amazing solution for the cheap price of $150 is their target range. I guess for three, and if you already had two, it's even cheaper. This one's going to be a game changer for this market, and it's going to be coming from the same guy who gave me the news over on two, one of the best reviewers of this product and this software. So got to give him a special shout out there at Lo-Fi Leaf. He is really the news correspondent for like what's going on with this MIDI Guitar 3 that they've been developing now. You know, it's been over a year and they're really putting the work into it. They're putting it through the beta testers, and that's why they're you know allowing people to go check it out now and get an early copy of it to try out. And as for their website, let's see if I can find their website here. He mentions it. It is in the description. And I would recommend, yeah, jamorigin.com. I would recommend for those of you who are interested, go to this beta testing page. They make it available right off the bat. You should contact them. They do have a form. Try it out. Tell them what you think. You're getting early access, and you'll help them to shape the development of this. It is going to be game changing with this version 3, as you'll see with these features here. When me and May went through it, every little feature that they added is all ones that have been asked for years now. And I love when I see a software company who listens, you know, to their users and as May mentioned, it also works for voice too. For those singers out there who would like to be able to hum and figure out like whether they're singing in pitch or not, this is as much a useful tool on that side as it is for guitar to MIDI conversion.
Nice. Being able to check your work on the vocals.
Yeah, so definitely you're going to want to check out jamorigin.com and visit Lo-Fi Leaf if you want to keep up on all of it. Let's take a look here at this video real quick. And as you see these features, tell me that you wouldn't utilize some of these features, even on the bass side. It's as powerful for, and most importantly, they've gotten it to be able to translate down to, I think he said C or B0. So like this thing is capable and now able to go right down to the very bottom, which is tough when it comes to the MIDI range. Usually when you get down into one, it's very hard to get anything to work below there.
So, for anybody interested in MIDI Guitar 3, here's some really exciting news with the latest update to 3.060, I think. Ever since I started my videos on Jam Origin's MIDI Guitar 2 and now MIDI Guitar 3, people have asked about alternate tunings and different ways of tuning and retuning, and we have two things that should be interesting. But both of these hinges on you having the hex version of the MIDI Guitar 3 software, of course, because it's kind of important that you have these 6 audio streams that turns into 6 MIDI streams so that we can manipulate those independently of each other. You can use DADGAD or whatever tuning down to B0, which is really, really low. And I've outfitted my 8-string Ibanez with a traditional hex pickup, so I can only show you the lowest 6 strings of that 8-string, of course, but this is just an example to show you that it actually works even for those low tunings. I think the lowest string is an F sharp 1. A traditional guitar would have its lowest pitch at E2. A bass would have an E1, I think. So this first example was a way for the Jam Origin software to accommodate for a tuning of the external physical instrument. Now there's a new way to actually do quite the same thing, but inside of the MIDI guitar software itself. So you can have your traditionally tuned 6-string guitar, but you can do the retunings inside of MIDI guitar instead. So use your traditionally tuned guitar, but tune it in DADGAD, but here it's just a software setting in a preset. This facilitates really specific kinds of tunings that you probably haven't really thought about earlier, but if we go back in history and look at somebody like Alan Holdsworth and what he did with the syntax, for instance, we can mess around with really interesting tunings like his fourths tuning in spokes, where he had every other string also raised by an octave. So with MIDI Guitar 3 you can have several of these tunings side by side and switch between them with something as easy as a press of a foot pedal. So you can switch between Alan Holdsworth's spokes tunings and Joni Mitchell's Black Crow tuning, which also is a really weird tuning if you haven't looked at it. One other module that's new for the hex tracker users is string gain. And that's a module with 6 knobs, one for each string, and that's just a volume for each string. So if one of your hex pickups microphones is a little off, you can adjust that with this settings rather than having to go to the GP10 and make these different settings. I don't want to go into that menu system because I think it's kind of cumbersome. So I think this is a great addition. Being able to make these settings per patch for different instruments and save that down to the patch. And some news that isn't just for the hex users. If you're at all familiar with the MIDI patch bay area in MIDI Guitar 3, that's where we connect our MIDI controllers to whatever parameters we're trying to control in MIDI Guitar 3. Click on one of these and you'll see the new patch bay envelope editor. This is a way for you to also affect the way that your controller, like a foot pedal, can be acting on any of these parameters that you want to control. And with the addition of this new window for this curve function, the latch and invert function that you had below the CC numbers before in the earlier versions of MIDI Guitar 3 now have moved inside of this and appear as buttons below this curve window. And before we leave the patch bay area, at the top you'll see 3 new categories, and that's strike, pressure and brightness. These are the MP qualities from the guitar coming down to the patch bay area to give you access to this envelope editor if you want to, so that more easily than going into the modulator and do these settings, you can do these settings down here. But do remember that these 3 categories are polyphonic rather than the monophonic nature that the other CCs have. You also have a new 2-octave whammy pedal. That is a MIDI effect, so you want to put it before your instrument rather than after it, affecting the audio that you would do with the traditional whammy, I guess. But another new thing that is really interesting is the audio device module. We can use a secondary audio device inside of MIDI Guitar nowadays, and this has really interesting applications because I can use a microphone and talk or sing into MIDI Guitar 3 and have a vocoder where I'm using my guitar for the MIDI that is to be affecting the voice that I'm putting in. Here I set up with an audio device, that's my Yeti microphone, and a vocoder from Arturia. Don't forget to use this in MP mode if you can, because it's way cooler with these polyphonic bends if you're going to bend your voice as well. Voice in here, you can use the sample of course, then you can just play your guitar for a lot of cool effects. But if you want to use your voice as well, use the voice here. Since we have both audio and MIDI on the same channel, this is also really effective. We can use one channel for both, say a microphone with my voice on it, and the MIDI that is converted by the incoming audio. So I'm actually using the MIDI from the guitar audio. As a side note, while we're on the subject of using one chain with both its audio and its MIDI capabilities, consider this. Any instrument that you open, like I have Falcon here, open on the chain here, but this is mainly to serve as basis for another instrument that I have. Traditionally, if I put another synth here, it would sort of override anything that the Falcon synth would have. But since I can use the audio, I can go into Pigments here and look for any place that has an audio in. Traditionally, we talk about side chaining the audio in. If I go into Synth here in Pigments and go into the utility engine, for instance, I can use either noise or I can use something like an audio input. In this case, I've used audio input. So I actually have my guitar coming in being part of the sound here in Pigment. A pretty fundamental part of this sound, but it's also going to be affected by the filters, all the effects that I'm using, and if I were to use the sequencer, it's also going to be affected by that. So just the Falcon synth, when I don't have the Pigment synth activated. Let's activate the Pigment synth. I seem to have connected that to some breath controller. Let's see if I have that connected. Okay, so this is a rather complex setup, but it's not hard to understand really. I'm using the utility here to funnel my audio in because I can. The audio in is actually there, and I can put any instrument before this. I could use a swamp sax to use its audio in and affect it in the same way. But this is one of the interesting applications of having this audio coming in the same place as the MIDI actually. So if I go into the effects part here, I have a slot here that's not used, so I could actually go in and use the new vocoder. And if I look at the modulator here, I can also use the audio in, and that would be me using the synth before it, again the UVI guitar synth. And now it's coming in as the modulator for this. And this means I'm using the audio in two places for this particular patch. I'm using it as a modulator in the vocoder part, but I'm also using it as a part of the actual sound. This would go for any audio that I have before it on this chain like this. And imagine how complex kinds of chains you can use, and it's really, really easy to set up. There's also some changes done to the MIDI out. Now I can send my MIDI out specifically to my audio interface if I want to control, say, an external instrument or something like this. I can't go over everything because there's a long list of stuff that has been updated. Get yourselves into the MIDI Guitar forum and check out all the changes to this update for yourselves. I'm pretty convinced that you'll be pleased about this. Many of you have had these wishes for at least support of alternate tunings, and this string tuning stuff that you've been able to do with Fishman Triple Play or whatever from before. And together with all these string filters and pitch filters and stuff like this, you can start creating your own zones for different instruments on different strings and stuff like this. As far as I know right now, this is a Mac only update. Keep updated on the beta page for the PC or Windows version. And I'll talk to you later. See you soon. Bye.
Now, if that doesn't get some of you stringed instrument players out there drooling a little bit, thinking of some possibilities, then I don't know what will.
Yeah, no, that could definitely do some good stuff right there for sure.
With the ideas that you start coming up with, like DWD mentioned that, my mind is racing right now with ideas. Me too.
Yeah, and that's the thing is with things like the altered tunings. Like if you set it to DADGAD tuning and your guitar is set to regular tuning, if you're listening, if you hear it in the room, you'll hear the regular tuning. So it would be one of those things where it would be, you'd have to be really in the recording with your headphones and not hearing the room noise, because the room noise would be, to me, distracting if it's playing a different note than what I'm actually doing.
Yeah. It would be more useful, say, in a recording sequencing situation. If you were to utilize it live, though, I mean, it would just be a matter of what you're monitoring. You'd have to be monitoring the synths that you're triggering, the sounds that you're playing, not the actual sound coming out of the guitar, because in those cases, it's doing all the tuning adjustments before it gets to the patch, and
That's
then
where like
what you hear.
A regular electric guitar as opposed to an acoustic electric or an acoustic guitar, because either of those is going to project that regular note that you're actually hitting into the room, so you would hear more of that and it would get into the microphones and all that. So
so it's not going to solve it for the guitarist who wants to be able to mic their acoustic, do alternate tuning, and be able to get that natural sound along with, like, say, a synth sound. It won't solve that scenario, but it does open up like a lot of opportunities. Those guitarists who want to play on stage and don't want to have to carry, 3, 4 guitars to the show in order to be able to have alternate tunings, these new solutions definitely open up some options.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I have seen people bring as many as, I think it was 7 guitars for one guitar player at a gig. And it's like just keeping them all in tune. That's like half a job on its own. Like, let alone bringing them all and getting them all up there, and breaking them all out, making sure they're all good, knowing which ones you need for each song. It's like, wow.
Yeah, and just the other little modules that they've added for different features, the ability to actually adjust each string levels.
I love that.
Fine tuning. It's like, wow. I wish guitars were that versatile, like out of the box, and and being able to add those cool like voice enhancements and it's like you just got a talk box for free, built in. I don't know any guitarist who's crazy and experimental who wouldn't want or at least play around with a talk box if they could get their hands on one, and now you can.
Exactly. Very cool.
Yeah, this is definitely something to keep attention to as they finish up this. They've been talking about it for the last year and a half as they've been developing it from 2. Version 2 made a lot of noise, got rave reviews because it's such low latency and its response, and it's only gotten better with 3. As he mentioned, what came out Sunday was specifically on the Mac side, but Jam Origin did let people know they're working on the port to the Windows side, just taking a little bit longer because they have to get their Windows development machines in order, and sometime in the next couple of days, you'll see the Windows version come out, and I would be interested to hear the results on both sides there.
Right when they mentioned the Mac thing, I was like, and it was going so well.
I know, I was the same way. I was like, damn it. But I did check out their page, and they have assured, the testers that it's on its way. They're not gonna ignore the Windows side. It's just, sometimes it is easier to get this stuff developed on one platform and then smooth it out on the other one.
Nice.
But I am looking forward to that. Thank you, Leaf, for that piece of news. It is one that I've been waiting a long time for, and he is such a champ of this software. So many people ask me about this and this kind of stuff, and I've always been pushing them towards the MIDI pickup side because forever it's been the only way to really do it right. And now we have some new options and answers.
Nice. It is good to have options for sure.
Yeah. And it's nice that they're getting the betas out there and getting the actual players to do the testing to develop it. That's how you develop good software.
Yep, absolutely.
Props, Jam Origin.
Indeed.
JamOrigin.com.
Even a cool name.
Yeah. So now we're going to slide over to our genres and talk about these genres that are going to be coming in this Saturday with these mashups. And with the mashup number 1, we've got our punk challenge. So I went on a hunt for what is punk, and go figure, Ange found the best video. I mean, it's a shorty, but it does give a good introduction into what is punk. It asks the question. So the videos that actually do ask the question that I'm searching for tend to hit the mark more so. And for this one, it is what is punk, going to be coming from @Culture Sonar over on YouTube. And I like that they're going with the claymation approach. It's very retro. It takes me
Claymation's always
back.
fun. Yeah.
It takes me back to when I was a kid on Sundays and watch Davy and Goliath, the kid and the dog.
Sure.
We've got that here, and a quick little 3-minute introduction. And then we're going to take a little bigger look at the history of punk afterwards. We'll show you where that's coming from.
Once upon a time, there was a deafening roar that awakened the people like never before. With their eyes open wide, they shouted in fear, "What new sound is this?" and covered their ears. It was punk. So what is this punk, you may want to know? Are there people called punks? Did they make it so? Did punk come from here or way over there, rise up from the dirt, spring out of thin air? Some think punk was born in downtown New York City with a sonic revolution at Max's and CBGB. Kids jumped out of their seats, started climbing the walls for the music of television and the New York Dolls. There were Talking Heads, too, and the Velvet Underground, and the fierce band Blondie, all with a fresh new sound. From the borough of Queens came contenders to the throne in blue jeans and leather, 4 teens called Ramones. They got straight to the point, a 1, 2, and 3, 4. Hey ho, let's go! 2-minute songs, never more. Out near Lake Michigan, where they build America's cars, Motown funk met gritty punk, and Detroit had a new star. Iggy Pop and the Stooges were known for outrageous stunts. If you ask, anyone will tell you Iggy never wore a shirt, not once. Back in foggy London town, things were getting really bad. All the young kids in the streets seemed to be going mad. They played music that was new, it was bold, and it was brash. The Damned and the Sex Pistols, the Buzzcocks and the Clash. That's right, the Sex Pistols, a name naughty as can be, would harass the upper class with songs of Queen and anarchy. They hoped that their sound would never be forgotten, so they made up silly names like Sid Vicious and Johnny Rotten. And when London was burning, the mighty Clash heard the call. They played songs for working people and equality for all. When the Clash fought the law, they were the coolest band around. With their punk rock and ska, they defined a brand new sound. Punks made a lot of noise. They had something to say. And just like the boys, the girls came to play. Susie, Go-Go's, and Blondie, X-Ray Specs, and the Slits all made a holy racket with their glitter and their grit. Out west in sunny LA, they lived close to the beach. Bands like X and Black Flag had a punk gospel to preach. The Descendants and the Dickies, Circle Jerks, Germs, and Weirdos were all punks who had fun and kept fans on their toes. In Washington, D.C., Bad Brains were the rage. They played reggae and hardcore and brought on punk's new age. They say punk is a sound that can be loud and fast, but it's also a movement. Ask the Misfits. Ask Crass. This was a quick story of a few of the bands who made the world safe for the punks of the land. In your city or town, you'll find many more stories of punk culture to learn and explore. So what is this punk, you still want to know? Is it noise or just junk? Did it die long ago? Punk is music, it's art, it's culture and vision. But if you really want to know punk, you just have to listen.
Oh, that was a great moral to the story. You just have to listen to understand punk.
Exactly. You'll know it when you hear it.
Yeah. And I love how he took like the night before Christmas kind of approach. 'Twas the night before the wag, and punk was in town.
No one's wearing a frown.
Love the claymation characters too. I'm curious as to if he actually did the work there or utilized a little AI. Looked fantastic.
Very well done.
And he didn't ignore, the different evolutions. Because for me, I've always been more familiar with the 70s going into the 80s punk. That's what I grew up with as a kid. And by the time it had resurged in the 90s, it was a different kind of punk. And for me, I wasn't even calling it punk or considering it punk in some cases. I could hear the punk elements, but at that point, we were going into whole new genres of punk, which were mixed with some of these other genres we're going to look at. And, the rock had started to mutate it even more. And
I like the regionality also covering, what was going on in DC versus what was going on in California. Like there's a bunch of different specific spots where, a scene was happening and it was important in that place at that time as well.
Yeah, and somebody had mentioned the other night, it's a genre that influences other genres. It plays off of certain cultural moments at the times when it comes out. It represents the energy of the youth and sometimes the political movements of the time and the feelings of the country and God save the Queen, depending on where the punk is coming from.
Sure.
And of course, like he had said, for some, it's an attitude, it's an image, and this next one we're going to look at does get more into that side of things. Covers the different evolutions of punk as it went from being like that 70s garage kind of band sound to becoming something that the industry realized, whoo, we can make a lot of money off of this. And you'll start to see as it evolves what happens when you have a genre that starts off raw and uncontrolled, and the record companies get their claws on it and what it turns into. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of like what we saw with certain metal, going from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, and as the record companies started to polish it and ooh, look, a shiny song.
Yep. And what did they do to it?
Yeah. It was sometimes they did good, and in some cases, it's what was the beginning of the end of that genre as things had to shift to something else because eventually oversaturation kicks in.
Yeah. True.
So this is a Freshie channel. I came across him. Again, when I was looking at these different, I found a couple of good punk history videos, and I kind of flipped back and forth between this one and another one that was really good. But I ended up going with this one because he gives a well-rounded history and he doesn't ignore the changing as it had gone through, going from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, and he connects the dots much better. So I went with at music B sharp for this one. He gives a nice full explanation of the evolution of it.
Nice.
And he says a brief history, but I mean, he really does cover like the important parts of it. Doesn't get so much into the 21st century side. That's still a story being told, but does a good job of where it starts from and what it went through to get into the 21st century.
Nice.
So a brief history of punk rock. And I almost had a video in here that had a good explanation on hardcore punk, but I shied away from it because, it's really it was just focused on that specific aspect of punk. And just like hardcore metal, it's hard to get a good idea of a genre if you're only focused on the hardcore side of it. The hardcore side tends to actually ignore a lot of the elements that we're going to be talking about here.
Whether you're an old school punk rocker, a punk rock TikToker, or just a hardcore poser like me, you love everything about punk rock. Its rebellious spirit, its inherent inclusivity, and maybe even the music itself. But not all punk is the same. Some punk rock is hard, fast, and full of raw emotion. Some is super hard, super fast, and overflowing with raw emotion. But most punk is just super shitty, like a toilet overflowing with raw sewage. Fortunately, punk rock has gone through several different eras, and knowing about the different times in punk history make it much easier to separate the trash from the clash, the bands that you want to forget from bands like Minor Threat. And since there's nothing more punk than taking thousands of diverse bands and cramming them all into just a few neat little categories, that's exactly what I'm going to do in this video. Number 1, classic punk. This was the era that started it all. I'm talking about mid to late 1970s bands like The Clash, the Sex Pistols, and the Ramones. You know, the bands you tell everyone you're a huge fan of, even though you never actually listened to them. But that's okay. If you've heard one Ramones song, you've heard them all. I'm pretty sure they only have like 3 songs anyway, because the only ones I ever hear anywhere are Blitzkrieg Bop, I Want to Be Sedated, and Beat on the Brat. The only Sex Pistol song anyone knows is Anarchy in the UK. So don't worry about it if you don't listen to a lot of classic punk. No one does. It hasn't meant to be listened to in decades. Now it's purely just for show. Nothing tells the world what a cool, modern punk you are like sporting classic punk merch. If you don't already have a Black Ramones t-shirt, run down to Walmart and get one. Maybe get a Sex Pistols patch from Amazon to slap on the battle vest you also got from Amazon. And that's all you really need to do to show the world how much you love classic punk without actually having to listen to that slow, boring, ancient crap. But even if you don't listen to any classic punk, you have to respect it. Normal rock conventions be damned, these bands would search and destroy the status quo in rock music, paving the way for the next era of punk, which, in reality, was the only true era of punk. Number 2, hardcore punk, aka real punk. I was born just in time to miss the brief period when true punk rock existed. By the time I was old enough to go to shows in the early 90s, all the really good punk bands had broken up. Some of the mediocre ones signed to major labels, and their music eventually turned to shit. But for a brief moment in time, from about 1978 to 1988, there existed this wonderful thing called punk rock. Real punk rock. I'm talking about what we now call hardcore punk. Bands like Minor Threat, Black Flag, Bad Brains, Reagan Youth, Dead Kennedys, Verbal Abuse, 7 Seconds. You know, real punk. In fact, they were so punk that they didn't even really refer to themselves as punk back then. Just hardcore. And hardcore these bands were. They didn't give a fuck. They sang about crazy shit other rock bands never would have, like stealing people's mail, hanging skulls on their walls, and not getting fucked up on drugs and alcohol. Not getting fucked up. Imagine that. Straight edge. These bands put out records and toured the country without the backing of a major label. None of them did it for the money or fame. So why did they do it? Because they were punk as fuck. That's why. At the time, these real punk bands might have been out of step with the world, but they helped pave the way for punk's popularity to eventually rise above other genres of rock. But since these are real punks we're talking about, they knew that swimming in the mainstream is such a lame dream. Many stayed true to their DIY roots, wanting nothing to do with major labels and corporate media. Some even called for MTV to get off the air. But they could see the writing on the wall. A big takeover was about to take place. The hardcore punk bubble was about to pop, and the pop punk bubble was about to blow up. Number 3, pop punk. Record labels are great at discovering raw underground music and watering it down, dumbing it down, overproducing it, mass producing it, and then massively profiting from it. In the early 1990s, the majors set their sights on a few yet-to-be-exploited music scenes, most notably hip-hop and punk. Both genres started on the streets with lyrics about things like social issues, political injustice, and self-sufficiency. But after the big record companies got involved, punk songs went from being about high self-sufficiency to having low self-esteem, from being about the scene to being about some new girl you're seeing. In other words, from punk to pop. And as soon as punk mixed with pop, you couldn't keep them separated. By the mid-90s, pop-punk dominated the airwaves. Welcome to pop-punk paradise. Before then, if you wanted to hear punk rock, you had to actually go to a show. But now you could just turn on MTV or the radio. Once bands like Green Day, Rancid, and The Offspring came out to play, punk rock reached the masses. But as time went on, music became more pop rock and less punk rock. The attitudes and ideals that once defined punk rock went right out the window. The music no longer mattered as long as it was still played somewhat hard and fast. Now it was all about image. If you looked a certain way, you were punk. What was once aggressive, underground music only for outcasts and weirdos now had turned into melodious music the whole family could enjoy. Once I started hearing old men and little girls alike singing along to songs like Ruby Soho and Self-Esteem, I knew that real punk rock was truly dead. But a lot of early pop punk was actually really good. Bands like Bad Religion, NoFX, Green Day, Sublime, and others got started long before playing in a punk band could land you $1 million record contract. Before Rancid was all over MTV, half the members were in Op IV. All these bands might have had lots of dollar bills in their hands by the mid-90s, But they also had lots of true punk spirit in their hearts back in the 80s when such a thing might have existed. Since these bands got started long before punk was cool, their early music retained at least some level of authenticity. But by the mid to late 90s, when punk CDs and Warped Tour tickets were selling like crazy, selling out became the thing to do. Everyone wanted to jump on the punk rock bandwagon, and a new era of punk was born. Number 4, poser punk, aka corporate punk. By the late 90s and early 2000s, punk rock no longer existed on the streets or in small shady clubs. Now it existed in shopping malls and sports arenas. Anyone with a few bucks to spend could become punk overnight. With just one trip to Hot Topic, you could go from preppy to punk in the blink of an eye. A few pins and patches, a checkered belt, a bottle of Manic Panic, and maybe a studded armband was all it took to complete the punk rock look. The poser punk look. Since punk rock had become both popular and profitable, and you no longer had to be even remotely edgy or original to play it, lots of young bands wanted to get a piece of that sweet poser punk pie. So tons of punk bands started popping up in the hopes that they could sell out fast. And many did. Record labels were quick to sign the punkest of the punk. The punkest looking, of course, not the punkest sounding. The bands with the punkest image. Record labels came up with a simple plan to take all their newfound punk bands and make ridiculous sums of money off them, and that's exactly what they did. Poser punk bands like Good Charlotte might have made bad music, but they sure made good money. Bands like Rise Against would rise with other poser punks up the Billboard charts. Though it might have seemed complicated to people like the poser punk queen, in reality, it was quite simple. Look punk rock, play pop rock, make mad guap. Lots of bands were happy to cash in on the punk rock gravy train. And of course, the corporate world was more than happy to exploit punk bands and fans alike, squeezing every last dollar they could out of both. But even though many punk OGs, well, OPs I guess, had walked away from the scene years earlier and wanted to smash up the watered-down corporate punk rock of the 2000s and beyond, there was one good thing to come out of it. This mainstream poser punk helped a whole new generation of punk rockers to discover earlier eras of punk when the music was actually good and the people making it were actually punk. Number 5, post-punk. Isn't punk at all. It's right there in the name. Post-punk. Post means after, so post-punk means after punk. And if it came after punk, it can't be punk. Same with pre-punk, aka proto-punk. If it came before punk, it can't be punk. Proto-punk and post-punk are about as punk as Post Malone. Interestingly, a good rule of thumb when trying to figure out if a punk album is good or not is to give it what I call the Malone test. If the album was released before Post Malone was born in 1995, in other words, if the album is pre-Post Malone, there's a good chance it might be decent. If it's post-Post Malone and came out after he was born, there's a good chance it sucks. So remember, pre-Malone, decent, Post Malone, sucks. And there you have it. 50 years of punk rock history smashed down into just a few short minutes. Thousands of bands cramped into a few simple categories. And now that you've listened to me tell you about all the different eras of punk, it's time that I tell you the punk rock truth. It's all bullshit. That's right, it's all made up. There are no eras or waves of punk. Sure, punk has evolved over time like everything else, but any attempt to neatly organize punk bands into arbitrarily chosen eras or even subgenres is doing a disservice to all of punk. How can you reduce a band like The Damned down to a single era? They've been around since the damn beginning and are still killing it today. Or how can you reduce a band like Rancid or Bad Brains down to a single punk subgenre when their music, like many punk bands, has elements of several? Punk isn't meant to be organized and categorized. It's meant to be experienced. To even try to define what is or isn't punk is to miss the point entirely. It's not about the sound or the look, and it never was. It's about the spirit, the emotion, the attitude. Gotta keep that PMA. That's the beauty of real punk music. It can sound like anything. It's about being different. It's about not conforming to bullshit norms, including musically. There are bands out there today that might not look or sound punk, but if they have the attitude and the spirit, I say they're punk as fuck. Anyone telling you that punk rock is dead is full of shit. Anyone telling you it's still alive is full of shit too. The truth is somewhere in the middle. But you don't need me or anybody else to tell you what is or isn't punk. The only thing I can tell you for certain is that if you're one of these people on Reddit or TikTok who's constantly asking, is this thing punk? Is that thing punk? Then you are definitely not punk. Because there's nothing less punk than trying to be punk. And there's nothing more punk than not giving a shit what anyone thinks is or isn't punk. And now that I've told you that eras and genres are arbitrary and meaningless, you tell me in the comments what your favorite eras and subgenres of punk are.
You're so annoying.
If you want to hear some of my music that definitely is not in any way, shape, or form even remotely inspired by punk, click the link in the description or search for this dude on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you usually listen to music that is definitely not at all in any way, shape, or form even remotely inspired by punk.
Oh, and we will be listening at Music B Sharp
Brought to you
over
by
on
notpunk.com.
And I like his assessment. If you're listening here, you're full of shh IT. But I like how he summed it up, and the observation of a genre that eventually gets to a post genre, because it's not just punk in the 90s that did that. There is such a thing as post grunge, and I'm sure they'll be talking about that in the video we're going to be looking at in a little bit. These are the moments where, like he observed there, that the record industry gets involved, things start to get diluted, and it shifts from the genre it was, starts to get that pop or popular kind of approach, and it starts to become something after the genre's over. But his point that, like, all those 90s punk songs and bands that had come in did actually do a great job of bringing in a whole new young generation who would eventually go to look at where the roots of punk came from. And it did give a resurgence to some of that 70s and early 80s punk that a lot of people would have never been familiar with otherwise.
Yeah, it's good when it reintroduces or brings a new generation to things from the past. That's a good thing for sure.
Yeah, and then that's why I do consider it one of those. It's a bridge genre to me. It's one that will always resurface every 20, 25 years for a new audience, and with mutations, with new blending of genres, because now there's different genres in the 90s that weren't there in the 70s, and you got things like Green Day and Avril Lavigne. Who would have thunk it? The punk pop queen.
Yep. Just like that.
And it's funny to see some of those artists as now they've evolved through time as well. And it's kind of like listening to Metallica now and associating them with country instead of metal. And, Avril probably listens to like her early works and thinks like, damn, I'm much classier than that.
One I was going to ever mention was might have been you that showed it to me. Ronnie James Dio through the years.
Yeah,
like that was an eye opener, because just seeing, like, you want to talk about a progression or a change or spanning a lot of ground when it comes to style. That was a real eye opener.
Well, hearing his church and gospel work in the 60s, who would have thunk it? It was like, wow, this is the guy that would go on in the 70s to become Dio.
Yep.
And I always wondered why, like, he hadn't brought back some of that sound after, blowing up over in the metal side. Why he didn't consider like incorporating some of those early sounds that he did, which were,
I could understand why.
Yeah, but it
would have to be a very receptive audience. Yeah.
It could have made for some very interesting types of metal
interesting for sure,
that we still don't hear to this day.
Metal that never was, metal that could have been, metal that we may be able to imagine someday.
Yeah, and some people are still trying to figure out.
Exactly.
So that was at least a good explanation of where punk's been and where it might possibly be going now that we're going into the 21st century and there's a lot more punk options out there. But keep in mind some of what he said there about whether you're doing it for image, because genres that get too caught up in image and forget about the sound, never forget that like what really makes a music genre does go back to the sound first and foremost. Image and all of that helps to define a subgenre a certain way, but genres get started by the sound.
It should also be authentic. I mean, that's another important thing, at least to me. Like, it shouldn't seem forced to people watching. Like, you shouldn't feel like you're trying to support your image, you're trying to fit into your role. You should just be who you are and present that,
If
rather than trying
if
to
you
be something you're not.
if you don't come across as authentic, you will eventually be those poser waves of the genre where it's like, you look like a fake trying to present themselves as something real.
Exactly. Try to imagine what you would want to present yourself as and, build into that.
Yeah, yeah, good explanation coming there. So now we're going to shift over to the popular side of genres, one that never truly leaves. This is a genre that never completely disappears. It sometimes goes into the background while certain genres take over, but pop has a way of kind of always being there, always having some influence, even when other genres are dominant. You'll see pop kind of get tied into metal or rock or even grunge and some of these other ones, punk. They've all had their taste of pop, and that's usually when the genre does hit the mainstream. When something does manage to get on all the radio stations and there's something catchy about it that people can't ignore.
Yep. They call it pop because it's popular, right? So I mean,
Yeah, well,
when it gets popular, it's popular for sure. And that's one thing is like it does cover a lot of ground because of that. It's it can move, be more rock oriented or more pop oriented or more country oriented or whatever. It can slide around some, but there's always going to be that heart that's always there, like you're saying. Yeah.
Yep. And that's why I picked this video, because again, had a lot of different choices on what is pop and what is popular and everything, and something clever at D News Plus over on YouTube. His observations here really hit the mark. And again, with this channel here, we like science. So when they can kind of give a scientifical explanation to something that's musical, which he does here, how pop music has become a science, which it really has. And I completely agree with his assessment of the science behind it and why when we're listening to things, why some things work and some things don't, and what does turn genres or songs, bands, artists into that magical recipe that hits the popular radio stations.
Yep. Has to hit that nerve, hits a couple of people, they start spreading, whether it's through word of mouth or whether it's just becoming popular and getting requested on stations so that it generates more buzz and gets more, momentum behind it, and gets that going.
Yeah. Part of it is an observation on social science, and the other half of it is an observation on listening science and why we like certain notes, we like certain arrangement approaches, things that feel familiar, repetition, all the important things that tend to be part of like every big hit song.
Yep.
So let's see the science behind making a pop song.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Test Tube Plus. Today I am Trace. This is episode 3 in our series on music. So far we've talked about how the brain processes it, where music even came from, but today we're talking about what makes music so popular, so universal. How does it get stuck in our heads? It's gonna be great. In the 90s, when I was young, that Mentos commercial jingle got stuck in my head all the time. Fresh goes better, Mentos freshness. You're singing it right now, aren't you? ABC by the Jackson 5, you know, as I got older, Carly Rae Jepsen's Call Me Maybe was a big stick in there for sure. My dad really liked the Beatles. Yellow Submarine was big. Get Back gets stuck in my head a lot. You know, the Ignition remix by R. Kelly, that's in there all the time, pretty much every day. These are songs that get stuck in your head. That's called an earworm. Music triggers a part of the brain called the auditory cortex. We just mentioned this. The auditory cortex perceives and stores our auditory memories. Researchers at Dartmouth University did a study where they played part of a familiar song to research subjects, and then they stopped the song early. Using brain scans, they determined the participants' auditory cortex was filling in the rest of the song. Basically, our brains know what's coming, and if we know the song, we're going to listen to it inside of our own heads. When you're just imagining that song, the same thing happens. The auditory cortex is activated. And anything can cause an earworm. Just like any random memory popping into your head, you might have a song pop into your head. And once that song or rhythm or memory is triggered in any way, the auditory cortex is activated and is like, oh, you were thinking about that song? Here's the song. Go ahead. You can listen to it. And then it's just in there for the rest of the day, hot and fresh out the kitchen, no matter what you do. James Colaris, marketing professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Business Administration, found in studies that women musicians and people who are neurotic, tired, or stressed are more prone to getting an earworm, getting a song stuck in their head. If you're one of those people, let me know in the comments. And also, let me know if you have a strategy to get it out, because, oh man. Research published in the Quarterly Journal of Experimental Psychology showed that chewing gum is one way to get it out of your head. It literally makes it impossible for you to sing the song in your head because you can't chew gum and sing songs in your head at the same time, apparently. It interferes with voluntary processes such as recollections from verbal memory, interpretation of ambiguous auditory images, and scanning of familiar melodies. But songs that are stuck in your head, they're usually going to be the most catchy song. You know, they're going to be things that everyone recognizes. And some songs are just catchier than others, which is how pop music works. Pop music's job is to make money. It's to get a song stuck in your head. It's to get you to share that with other people. It's to get you to continually enjoy, or maybe not enjoy, that music. Britney Spears' Toxic, hated it. Then I kind of loved it. Now I definitely still love it. Yeah, for sure. It's in my head now. Thanks, great, awesome. There are 3 steps to pop music. 1, keep it simple. 2, do what works. 3, get it played everywhere. That's really important, obviously. A report by the Spanish National Research Council showed the diversity of note combinations in popular music has consistently diminished in the last 50 years. Think about it. Music just keeps getting simpler and simpler and simpler. If you don't believe me, go to a karaoke bar and ask somebody to play a Bob Dylan song and just watch the words on the screen. There are paragraphs of text, things that have complicated, multi-syllabic, very descriptive words. Then play a Katy Perry song. Most of the words are, yeah, baby, oh. It's very simple, very unisyllabic, doesn't really say that much. Simple, simple songs. And that's just since the 60s. Over time, there's the restriction of pitch transitions as well. It's the same chord progressions. You'd have the same thing over and over again. Listen to a Green Day song. All the sounds are the same. It's the same chord, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. You'd be surprised how many songs use the pattern 1, 5, 6, 4. The amount of songs that use these chord progressions is mind-boggling. It's so frequently used that you can hear it everywhere once you figure it out. There's a link down in the description in this video of the Axis of Awesome's 4-chord song. You can find that. It'll show you that it uses the same 4 chords, all these different things. You can also look up Pachelbel's Rant. Great comedian did a thing about how Pachelbel's canon can be found everywhere, from songs in Aerosmith to, it's everywhere. Just watch that as well. It will kind of blow your mind if you weren't aware of it. The homogenization of the timbral palette has also been under attack by pop music. This is the vibe of a song, or how many instruments are being used, how those instruments are being used creatively. We're using less trumpet now, obviously, than we used to. We're more using electric guitar and synths and obviously drums and cymbals. The sounds are also louder, which we explained a little bit about earlier in terms of compression. This can be explained because we subconsciously associate a track's loudness with its quality. If all the instruments, they're peaking, they're compressed, and they're all hitting really loudly at the same level, then the track is going to sound louder than a track where only the kick drum is loud and everything else is different. Phil Spector's Wall of Sound is a great example that came out in the 60s and 70s, and he would create this experience where things were just everywhere. There were sounds all across the whole listening field, and it kept people interested, it kept people engaged, and it also made people feel like there was a lot going on and it was exciting. Skrillex is also a great example. Bangarang is a song that some engineers use to show how peaking and compression can make a song sound a certain way. But when you do that, when you make everything compressed and all at the same loudness, you're ruining the idea of dynamic range. You're just throwing that out the window. And then songs don't have the depth that they do when you make some things quiet and some things loud. The authors of that same study, by the way, think that a song from 1955, if it had the right loudness and right pitch, the things that we expect from songs today, it could pass for a brand new shiny song. There are so many songs that are getting remade, in part of the fact because it's a modern band playing it, and it sounds completely different than it did when it was written 40 years ago. You want something even crazier? Go listen to Radiolab's episode called Speedy Beats. You will get goosebumps. They will play Beethoven at 160 beats a minute, and it's mind-blowing. It's crazy. As Jad Abumrad says, it makes you want to go run out into the snow, and it really does. That's what it feels like. Okay, so let's say that you have created a simple pop song. You've got a simple repeating pattern, and it's catchy, and you've done all of the different things that you need to do. Now what do you do with it? A Pew Research study says that 93% of Americans use a radio, so that's probably where you're going to have to go with it. That was as of 2012. Radio stations play the top 10 songs more than twice as often than they did a decade ago. For example, in 2013, Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines aired 70% more than the most played song from 2003, When I'm Gone by Three Doors Down, which, by the way, are variations of the 4-chord thing we were just talking about. The top 1% of artists earn 77% of all revenue from recorded music. So if you can get into the top 1%, you're doing all right. There was a time when radio stations would play what the listeners want to hear. Now, it's a little different. Radio stations have to compete with the internet. So they have to sometimes play what the record companies want us to hear, which may be one of the reasons why we listen to the same hit song, even though it didn't seem to be a hit yesterday. Combine that with the mere exposure effect. There's a famous study from the University of Michigan that showed participants enjoyed songs more the second and third times that they were exposed to those songs. So if radio stations play the song again and again, you're going to love it more the second time than you did the first time. And you're going to love it more the third time than you did the second time. And that keeps going for a little while, even when participants weren't aware that they were being exposed to the song. That's the kicker. I took a psych class when I was in college at Western Michigan University, and I think, if I remember correctly, it goes to about 11 times. The 11th time you listen to something, assuming that you still like it after 11 times, that's about the peak of your musical enjoyment. After that, you'll still like it, but it'll never hit that level of enjoyment that it did, your favorite song. Finally, just tack on one more study for you. In 2006, at Columbia University, they did something that showed that you can manufacture popularity. Researchers sent participants to music sites where they could discover, download, and rank music. On that site, there was a popularity section. People listened and downloaded and enjoyed the songs that were ranked as popular, songs that other people were also listening to. Part of our musical experience is we want to be part of a group, We want to know what's cool, what's the coolest songs. The researchers inverted the rankings, putting the least popular songs as appearing to be the most popular. Previously ignored and disliked songs became the most popular in the study. The previously most popular songs, the songs everyone loved, right at the bottom, nobody liked them. Just seeing that a song was supposedly popular got more people to enjoy them, to listen to them, and to download them, and to ultimately talk about them in their worlds. We love to belong, and part of the music industry is making sure they manufacture that belonging with popular music. And now you can see why pop music is pop music, because we all decided it was, as prompted by someone who owns a radio station, record label, or has enough money to get it to you. As you can see, things have changed a lot over the years of our musical experiences. Why don't you let us know down in the comments how you feel about how things have changed? Has music got better? Has music gotten worse over this time? What is your favorite song? The song you can listen to again and again and again and again and again. Tell us about that down in the comments as well. Thanks for coming to Test Tube Plus today. Make sure that you subscribe so you can get all of our episodes and all of our series. We're going to keep making this show. Come find us on Twitter. We're at TestTube. If you have suggestions on music we should listen to or episodes we should make in the future, you can also find me. I'm at Trace Dominguez. Thanks for listening and watching. From both.
Oh, I will be back, Trace, for much more. I can't wait to see the other episodes he has on this analysis, because I love when they get into research papers and studies like that tie into psychology and those social algorithms that you have to ask these questions. You need to dig into these answers to truly understand what he's looking for there. That was great analysis of the different changes in the music industry that we've seen over the last 30 years, going from what he mentioned, the 80s, where radio stations really had request lines and people called in, decided like what they, and a lot of times it was tied to what did they see on MTV. So they called the radio station because, hey, I heard this song over here and now I want to hear it in my car. To what he's noticing now as we get into these new approaches where the record industries are just kind of subliminally conditioning us into liking something, whether it's necessarily the popular song.
One of the radio stations around here, one of the New York stations, does basically they call it a UFER, where they'll play the first song by a band and then call in and request the second song, or go online and request what the second song will be for that. So while the first song is playing, they'll get requests from everybody but what the second song should be from that artist, and then they'll pick either the most popular or whichever one, and that way you'll get a song that's user requested from out in the field, as opposed to just being something that was force fed to the audience.
See, and I like that kind of combination approach there, where it kind of reminds, it's like the Pandora kind of approach, where what he had mentioned, where the perception of popular and that test of actually flipping it and making the ones that were less popular look like they were more popular. And you start to see the sheep effect, where they get herded over to becoming popular because of this mentality that, oh, well, if everybody likes it, I must like it too. What was always cool when Pandora first came out was its amazing ability to get to know your musical tastes and start to find an algorithm that said, you like this, you're probably going to like that. And it was very accurate at finding similar tastes.
I had fun with early Pandora there, because I have just very varied taste as far as I like things that are, classical over here, and could be reggae over there, and it could be, funk over here, whatever. There's just stuff all over the place. So if you try to map that and try to build an algorithm that covers that as a thing, it's like, you got to be pulling things from everywhere, but you can't pull everything because then you're not being selective enough. It has to be kind of targeted. So I would pick several artists. I would seed, whatever I'm doing, like, do 2 songs by this artist I like and 2 songs by that artist I like, and, do like 10 artists. So you build those 20 songs in there and then have it build from there, because it's like, okay, here's a lot of stuff that I like, by these artists, and it'll just build from that and make a whole, channel for you based on that. And it'll be some of those songs, but mostly it's those artists or songs by artists that are like those artists is what it would feed you.
Yeah, I had great experience with Pandora in the early 2000s. I was at a time in my life where I was shifting from the radio. I was no longer as much in the car, which is why I would listen to radio so much when I was younger. So, like, I wasn't getting the kind of MTV was no longer playing music. The internet, like, you either went and hunted for MP3s of exactly who you knew you wanted. You didn't peruse music the way that you used to. And when I first got introduced to Pandora, it was the early 2000s, and I was very honest with it. I started with the first couple of artists that like really appealed to me, piano music, contemporary, like folk, certain genres that were my cores. And I mean, within a week, it started throwing new artists at me I'd never heard of, but I became big fans of because it was so good at showing me the rest of the artists that were out there without being biased, without forcing it from record companies or, having to hear it 11 times like he mentioned. It was just natural and organic. And I haven't had that kind of experience since then because we shifted again towards like the Spotify's and these approaches now, which are a lot like the radio of the 90s, just like he mentioned, where you're being conditioned to like certain things because these music platforms are just doing the same thing that the radio's been doing for the last 20, 30 years.
See, as soon as we started digitizing music and getting MP3s in the first place, I had such a collection of classic rock, and I just kind of, I mean, as I said, I had a wide variety of stuff. So I did have stuff, on all ends of the spectrum, but a large percentage of it was classic rock. And with that whole thing, it was basically I had so much of my own music, I would just build my own playlist there, and it was huge, so many different artists and everything else, just put it on random and just go. And it's my own radio station. I didn't have to ever worry about commercials or any of that. But I also was never exposed to new music. So that
was the other big reason in the early 2000s that I was no longer compelled to go listen to the radio or go to one of these stations because I ripped every CD I ever had, plus everybody else's CD. So at that point, I was over inundated with music in my library that I really didn't feel compelled to seek, anything new.
Well,
So it took something like Pandora to actually keep the doors open to new talent.
Yep, I had so much in the collection, and I mean, I loved all the songs, but like sometimes you just wouldn't be in the mood for this song or that song or the next one, so you just skip some. I would eventually just make a collection that was just some of my favorite songs, maybe 50 or 100 songs that are just some of the ones I really, really like, and just play those over and over again. But sometimes you can, tire yourself out, past that 11, like I said, if it's going downhill after that, what happens on the 51st play, it's like, is that one now off the list and you're getting it out of there? I mean, some songs just never make it on the list in the first place, but I do get the whole repetition thing. And I was definitely, guilty of just having a closed silo, let's say, of music that, I wasn't adding to my collection of music. I would just listen to this stuff for, decades. And then with, so I guess probably when I was starting to learn bass and started to listening to the blues on the cable channel that I have. It's just a random, blues channel, just plays blues music 24 hours a day. So I would just turn to that and just start practicing bass lines and just try to figure stuff out by ear. And so I was getting exposed to that stuff. And since it was a lot of repetition, and since the blues is a very formula based style where, it's the structure, these bars and these chords, and you start doing that over and over again, and it starts to really sink in. So that helped a lot with, getting started with a whole new style like that.
Yeah, that observation on the 11th listen, it kind of like reminded me of the 101st monkey theory, and like when something hits that like catalyst moment, and now it either settles in or it mutates into a different experience, and that observation plus the chewing gum one. That's one I am going to put to the test because I get thrown the earworms, and I'm kind of curious if that really does work.
I do have something that helps me with earworms, because I mean, people can get me with an earworm, accidentally, whether it's, there's one commercial that comes on that has a particular, melody that just gets stuck in your head, even just by thinking about the commercial. I'm not even going to talk about what company it's for, but to get rid of the earworm, I would just like, there's a particular song or any song that really well, like one of those songs, like you said, that you could just start the beginning of it and your brain can just fill in the whole rest of the song, like you just listen to it all day. I just basically replace the earworm with Comfortably Numb or something like that, because that was my favorite song for a long time. So just, I can just hear Comfortably Numb anytime I want, just by, hitting play. So if I have something else stuck in my head, I could just start right into, that or any other, I listen to so much Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and the Grateful Dead and Fish, all that kind of stuff. There's so many of those songs I've heard so many times that, like he was saying, if you were to shut off a song, your brain would fill in the rest. That's how I can try to, people are like, how did you know that the chord change was going to do that? And it's like, well, I've heard the song before, so I know it feels like it should do. And I know where I just take a guess basically. And I, guess right a lot of the time because it feels like it should be this, because it is that. And because my brain knows that it should be that, and it should sound like this, it's that much higher. So let's jump there, that kind of thing.
Do you hear that, folks? Listen to 2 Pink Floyd songs and call me in the morning.
That's right. Always good advice. You throw in some Grateful
Dead too. Grateful Dead will always get you out of one zone and into another.
One in particular, Till the Morning Comes. That's a good one.
So that was a freshy new channel at D News Plus. Love it, love it, love it. I see a whole bunch of topics. This is going to be one of those binge channels for me.
Nice.
I love science. I love when we do get some of those like science related channels to help cover these topics, and that one nailed it.
Yep. And I am a big fan of science for sure.
And now we've got a genre that could be scientifical. It's one of the harder ones. It's one of the more complex ones. So there's actually 2 that we're going to look at to help cover this. One that is really more about the fundamentals of jazz, and what I really enjoy about this one, we had looked at him before when I was in the WAG last summer. I visited his channel because I really did need to get my jazz appreciation on. And Paul Effman Music Store, which is over at Paul Effman on YouTube, really has a great series here on jazz appreciation, what it is, how to understand it, both as a listener or as a musician. It's why I really preferred this one over some of the other videos that I had looked at, because it comes at it from both directions. And like our last one, there's some great observation as to the elements of jazz and the things that make this genre a genre. And it's one of the genres we kind of have to get into some of that in order to understand it. Whereas, with the other ones, examples and the history is enough to grasp something like punk or pop. But when it comes to jazz, there's a lot more theory. There's a lot more technicality to it. Ironically, when you hear a lot of them explain it, they try to emphasize you don't need to know a ton of theory or be super technical in order to appreciate it. But there's a lot more to understand about it. So Paul's going to help get us like comfortable with listening to it, understanding it. And then we're going to take a look at the vocal side of it, because for the contestants that are going to be doing it over on the WAG side, one of the challenges that I found when we were doing it last summer, singing is something that it's different in this genre, and the tips and tricks that you might want to know, they're more important when you're hitting a genre like this. It's not just like, oh, feel it out like a rock and roll singer. You do need to understand some of the techniques that go on with it.
Yeah, for sure. Also with jazz, one thing I would say is that some of the better introductory videos I've seen are ones they're trying to teach you to play jazz, for example, and it's ones that focus on jazz standards. And they're talking about, oh, you're going to go to a jazz jam somewhere. You should know some jazz standards at least. Just and they tell you like certain ones to start with. And some of the videos I've seen, you mentioned the same ones. So there's certain ones that are ideal to start with, because they really do teach you certain elements of jazz. Like the 2-5-1 turnaround is a big thing that you're gonna need to know. So it's like certain songs will
the
emphasize
the time signatures that you're likely to run into, which aren't going to be your typical 4/4s, and the different kinds of instruments that make up different styles of jazz. We did have a jazz night one night where we did cover some of these different topics around jazz, and it's not just one instrument that makes up this genre. This one, you could go all night just on percussion or brass, guitar techniques. Any one of those, you could go down a rabbit hole for the entire night.
Yep. And even with just individual players, Joe Pass or whatever, like you just pick somebody and just, go down, like you said, a rabbit hole where they could take you, you could blow your mind with all kinds of crazy, chords and scales and this and that, but you don't have to know all that to get started in jazz and to appreciate it. So the idea is to just kind of dive in, get your feet wet, see what's what, maybe, try a little of this over here, a little of that over there, and see what sparks your interest with jazz. That's kind of the way to go.
Yeah, and even if you take the approach of like going through the 20th century, and you start with the 20s and you go into the 30s and then the 40s, this is one of those genres, again, never disappears. It settles back sometimes and then comes back in the forefront, usually mixed with other genres. It is one of those genres that, just like punk, it's a great genre for transitioning other genres, and usually makes them more progressive. Because when you listen to the progressive rock and metal that you heard in the 80s and 90s, a lot of jazz techniques were incorporated into making those other genres more progressive.
Sure.
Especially on the drum side, because the jazz drummers tend to be some of the best drummers out there.
Give them that.
So let's see what Paul says about what's jazz. This is part of a series that he started doing over on his channel. I recommend anybody who's interested in jazz, go check it all out. Fantastic information. This is a learning experience to go through these, and you'll come out understanding jazz a lot better.
Jazz music has this kind of unique mystique among musicians. To classical musicians and rock guitarists alike, it can seem like this complex, otherworldly art form that breaks all the rules you've learned so far about music. I'm Dean DeMarzo from Paul Effman Music, and I want to demystify some of the stuff around jazz. So this is a new series I'm calling, Hey Dean, What's Jazz?
Hey Dean, what's jazz?
Jazz can mean a lot of different things to different people because there are just so many subgenres. The first thing that comes to mind when I say jazz is probably the big band swing of the 30s or the bebop of the 40s, but jazz is so much more than that. There's Latin jazz like the bossa nova and the samba. And the jazz fusion of the 80s. And there's all kinds of crazy new subgenres coming out literally every day. So what are the key points? What makes jazz jazz? First up, complex harmony. Harmony is the way that all the notes combine to create chords, and the way those chords combine to create chord progressions. Most of the pop and rock songs you know are probably just a few chords, and all those chords usually belong to the same key. Think of the key as a family of chords that all sound good together. Jazz composers use extended chords, which are chords that have extra notes thrown on top for extra flavor, and they borrow chords from other keys to give themselves a wider tonal palette to work from. Let's check out an example at the piano. Next, improvisation. For the most part, classical music is fixed. It's written down by the composer, and it's played back by the performer exactly as it was written. Sure, the performer has some leeway in terms of tempo and phrasing, but the notes on the page are what comes out of their instrument. In jazz music, along with other genres like blues and rock, there's a lot of improvisation involved, coming up with something completely new in the moment. Every performance is completely different because you've improvised the content. Playing a jazz song usually goes something like this. The band starts out by playing the melody of the song, the song you know. This is called the head. Then, when they get to the end of the melody, they'll play the chords through again, but this time they'll play a completely new melody that they make up on the spot. Each band member will go through this process. First, there will be a trumpet solo, then maybe a piano solo. You may even get a bass solo or even a drum solo. The improviser has to keep track of what chords the band is playing at any given moment to make sure what they're playing fits in with the music. This is one of the hardest parts of performing jazz music, because the chords and key can change lightning fast, and if you don't keep up, your solo gets really messy really fast. Musical communication. In any genre of music, it's really important that the musicians on stage are listening to each other, but jazz music takes that to a whole other level. Because everybody on stage is improvising, even when you're not taking a solo, you may be improvising your part a little bit. These players feed off each other, and the whole song evolves over the course of the performance. Something you play on the trumpet can influence the piano player or drummer to change up their style a little bit, and the whole song can take on a new direction mid-performance. That's part of what makes jazz performances so unique. They're different every time, and literally anything can happen. Musical iteration. Playing cover songs is an incredibly common thing in the jazz world. There's even a few hundred songs that every single jazz musician is expected to know, called standards. Jazz musicians know these songs so well that two musicians can meet for the first time on stage and say, hey, let's do Autumn Leaves in G, and play that song perfectly with no rehearsal whatsoever, and the audience will never know. A huge portion of early jazz songs were just jazz arrangements of popular songs of the day from theater and pop music. This is still happening today with bands like the Bad Plus doing jazz versions of classic rock songs. This culture of rearranging and remaking music means that the jazz music that's already in existence is constantly evolving, and it's also constantly taking in new information from other genres. This is what keeps jazz music alive and interesting generation after generation. So how do you get started with jazz music, whether you're interested in playing it or just listening to it? Either way, there's a few great albums you should start listening to. Miles Davis is always a good place to start, namely Kind of Blue, which is one of the best-selling albums of all time. Dave Brubeck's Take 5 is another incredible record. Some of my personal favorites are Chick Corea's Light as a Feather, the George Benson Cookbook, which is one of my favorite jazz guitar albums. Another great guitar album is Oz Noy's Ha. I know I'm being biased towards guitar here, but that's my main instrument, I can't help it. Other jazz legends to check out are Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, John Coltrane. These are all the essential immortal heroes of jazz, and just about anything you check out from them is a great representation of what jazz music is. On a more recent note, Snarky Puppy's We Like It Here is a great modern jazz kind of big band record. So start there, listen to those. When you find a tune you like, try to learn it on your instrument. If you can, try to learn it by ear. Transcribing by ear is such an essential process for jazz musicians. It's the way you're going to learn your favorite solos, because chances are there hasn't been sheet music released for every single record you find that you want to learn. It also gives you a deeper understanding of the music and your instrument. There are also a lot of great books to check out. Jamie Aebersold's Play Along series is essential jazz reading, especially Volume 1, How to Improvise. There's also the Real Book, which contains all those standards I mentioned earlier. Jazz is an enormous art form that you could spend a lifetime studying. So jump in and find something you like. You may not be into every style of jazz, so find one that speaks to you and start playing. Thanks for watching. I'm Dean DeMarzo, and this has been Hey Dean, What's Jazz? On Paul Effman Music. If you like this video, please subscribe for more videos like this one. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
So that was Dean coming from Paul Effman Studios.
Doing the jazz.
Yep, at Paul Effman over on YouTube. Did I tell you not like what a great way to just get introduced into the elements of jazz, what makes it, and his recommendations, those are great ones to get started with. It'll turn you into an appreciator of the genre.
Yep. And his point about classical music, that was huge, because when I took piano as a kid, that was the whole thing. It was all about playing that song that way. That's what's written on the page. It wasn't about improvising or learning how to make music in a certain key. It was about how to play that song that way. So that's where you'll find classically trained musicians a lot of times have a difficult time with improvisation because they're just not used to it. It's just not in their wheelhouse from what they learned from when they were younger, or from when they got started, because they're trying to play things a certain way. Whereas other styles of music, it is more about, okay, let's just play something in A, or let's just play something in C, or whatever. And that's a much more experimental way of going about music than classical is usually taught.
Oh yeah, if you know those jazz standards that he was talking, especially Autumn Leaves, because that one is like the de facto numero uno that like every jazz video I have seen, where they're like, if you're gonna know one thing, this is the one to start with, because that's going to be on the test.
Yep. There's a few of those, yeah. But like they were saying, the standards, there's certain, like when they say start with these, like they'll give you a, whether it's a top 10 or whatever, and it's not a definitive list like, oh, these are the only 10 you have to know. It's more like start with these because these teach you important concepts that are going to carry you a long distance through jazz, because you'll learn important things from each one of these that will build into hundreds, if not thousands, of songs just from the knowledge you pick up in these few songs in the beginning. So that's where the standards and starting with certain standards comes from.
Yeah, and as he mentioned, even in today's music, you're going to find some impressive new jazz bands out there. There are constant new ones coming every decade. There's bands that come in and redefine this genre. They elevate it, they evolve it, and it is one of the few genres that never really pauses. It's constantly mutating.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Especially now with the way that synthesizers and electronic instruments have become such a norm in our music. It really did help to take jazz into whole new directions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When he
And one of those
started mentioning things like Chick Corea, I was like, yeah.
and then when he mentioned the bossa nova, I was like, oh man, I love me some bossa nova for sure.
Yep.
Good
Yeah,
stuff.
and it does always kind of go back to some of the more traditional music styles. That's another thing that's great about jazz is it incorporates rhythms and things that a lot of other genres don't have that kind of diversity across grooves. Jazz, anything can work into jazz. Basically, there's some videos if you go on YouTube that they'll show you how to turn anything, how to make anything sound jazzy,
Oh, sure.
which is a great way to exercise the style because you can take any form of music and give it the jazz feel.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's
Yep.
all about, like you said, it's all about the phrasing. It's about how you're selecting certain things. How when you go outside the scale, that's one big thing about jazz is that most other styles of music, you don't go outside the key at all. Like the chords in rock are going to be the chords. They're
Yeah.
not. If you have a C, you're not going to get that C sharp. It's going to just stay in C. Whereas in jazz, you're using all those other notes that those 5 notes that are not part of the key that you're playing in. They're going to be used in jazz a lot. And that's where you're going to start, where those are placed and when you choose to place chromatic tones here as a passing tone or as somewhere to hang out to make tension because you're trying to create tension. Not everything is trying to be a beautiful song all the time. Like you're
Yeah.
supposed to try to build highs and lows, tension and release, beautiful and, ugly, can be contrasting in the same song.
Yeah, yeah. What one of the videos when we had that jazz night last year, one of the videos was why hitting the wrong note in this genre isn't the same as hitting the wrong note in jazz. And it's funny because it's very true. Like there are some genres where you can't hit the wrong note. It's
Classical
very
being one of
obvious.
them.
Yeah, yeah. And in jazz it's a happy accident. It's like, whoa, that's why it's jazzy.
Exactly. Discovered
I think
something new.
I think that's also why like blues goes so well with jazz is they have some of that same flexibility sometimes where like the notes kind of play off of different emotions and what you might think is a mistake in other genres is actually an emotional choice in things like blues and jazz.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And there's also the whole structural similarities there, where like with blues and with jazz, there's certain elements or some of these songs that have a very certain specific structure that just keeps things predictable. But at the same time, you're improvising over that structure, so it's different every time, and can have varying levels of energy and everything else, but stays within that commonality or the common structure, so that it is easier to communicate with other musicians about. You can all just jump into the same car and go to the same place without knowing each other or knowing each other's style just because
Yeah.
you knew the song in the first place.
Yeah, one of the interesting things from the round one submissions that we heard last week, one of the best songs was actually in the blues category. Pinky Chew had put together a song that was blues, but she incorporated little sprinkles of piano that gave it a very jazzy kind of feel. There was an acoustic bass that helped to give it that lounge sound. And I mean, she hit the mark on blues, but it was that little bit of jazz that she incorporated into it that actually gave it like that classy blues sound. And go figure, now in the next round, we just brought jazz in. I would have loved to have seen her get picked for that one. She's going to be doing punk this time, but she did give us a little sprinkle of jazz in round one, and we're ready for round two to bring on the jazz. And for the next video, that is also jazz related. As I said, I didn't want to ignore the singing side of it because they don't they don't talk as much about jazz singing techniques out there as I would like to have seen. They focus more on the music side, the instrumentation, the theory and techniques, but singing is something that's a part of jazz, and it's a very important part of it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
as I was looking for some good vocal tutorials on jazz singing, this one stood out, 1108 Vocal Studio. I went with this one because unlike the other ones that I'd found where they gave examples but no feedback on the technique and why you want to sing this way or incorporate it in and why it's important in jazz. She does a fantastic job of both giving examples and explaining like why this is part of the vocal approach in jazz, why it's important to consider these things if you're going to add vocals to jazz. And you should. It's a very fun genre to think outside the normal melody box. You get opportunities to sing in ways that you don't always get with the other genres.
Exactly. And it's all allowed.
In jazz, it's actually encouraged.
That's right.
This one comes from at 1108 Vocal Studio, and she's going to cover these singing tricks for jazz. Couple of different techniques that are important and should give you some nice examples of how to do these techniques. It's a nice little shorty. It's perfect for complementing, what is jazz.
Hey, I'm going to give you some tips for jazz vocals. I think out of all of the genres, jazz is probably the one that you have to know the most about music itself. I'm really terrible at music theory. I studied it early and have forgotten a lot of it, but even still, even though I don't have a lot of the terminology or the names for it, I can still feel it in my body. And this is what really helps me when I'm singing jazz. Jazz musicians can just kind of they can regurgitate jazz scales like they're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's not a big deal. And I don't think you have to be at that level to sing jazz well. That's what I'm saying. So let me give you an example. Summertime song, Summertime. Summertime and the living is easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich and your ma is good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. Kind of the most basic format of that song. Okay, now I'm going to go through and tell you a couple little things that you can do to jazz it up, so to speak. Summertime and the living is easy. So I kind of chopped up those words. And the living is easy. Okay, so you can do a lot of different options there. It's whether or not you like it more legato, which is stretched out, or more staccato, which is a little jumpier. Okay, fish are jumping and the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich and your ma is good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. So that's kind of a melodic and a rhythmic change right at one time. Okay, now let's talk about the melodic changes that you can make. Summertime and the living is easy. So that's pretty much the simplest way to sing that first line. But you could really mix it up. summertime, and the living is easy. As long as you stick within those jazz scales, again, na 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 na. You pick those notes that are in that key, that are right for that chord, that are within kind of that jazz feel. Summertime, and the living is easy. Fish are jumping. So instead of fish are jumping, fish are jumping. And the cotton is high. Your daddy's rich. You can also make it seem a lot more different just by the volume or the tone of your voice. So if I did head voice, your daddy's rich, feels different than if I went full out or in mixed voice. Your daddy's rich, and your ma is good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. So I'm mixing and matching my tones, not just my melodies. The notes that I'm choosing are pretty different from the normal melody of the song, but I'm also going in and out of breathy tones and sharp, edgy tones. This gives it even more of a sense of variety without me having to choose a whole bunch of other notes. I hope all of this helps. We didn't really talk about vibrato, and jazz vibrato is something that's pretty distinctive. So stay tuned for more. If you guys like videos on jazz, let us know, and we'll do some more with vibrato and some other details. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more content just like this every week.
Oh, it's a lot of fun to watch her in action. I love when I see a singer that kind of, you know, especially when they're singing like that and they use their hands almost like a conductor to help steer their highs and their lows, and you see their expressions, the way they open their mouth while they control with their hands, and their voices just float along the scale the way she does. It's fun to actually watch a singer like that.
Yep. And did a great job of it for sure. Great voice.
Yeah, well, she really showed the flexibility you can have with your melody in jazz, and as long as you do understand the scale that you're working in there. I love that she gave that quick little scale run example just to say, like, get comfortable with what you've got for notes to work with, and then start to figure where you're going to rise and fall. And the beauty with jazz, just like with blues, you can strategically go up or down wherever you want. And that can make the difference between something that sounds jazzy or bluesy. And when the voice goes low and then back up, and you turn into Mariah Carey all of a sudden. And
Gotta love that.
or go low like BB Rexa. These are the flexibility options that you get to have with a genre like that. I hope that anybody who is having to do jazz tracks, or anybody over on the WAG side that's new to it and getting thrown jazz as a challenge, go look at these channels. Look at she hinted about the importance of vibrato in jazz singing, and it's super true. So, if you really want to up your jazz vocal game there, look at what she's got for tips, because those were some fantastic introductory tips there.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, another freshie. That was at 1108 Vocal Studio over on YouTube. So We are now gonna finish up with grunge. The one that I would think would be simple, but as I went hunting for it, it's not. And there's a super lot of debate on this one. This is one of those genres where you can have 10 people debate over it, and every single one of them doesn't agree with the other on what it is, who's grunge, and some of these bands that get mentioned in some cases. Uh, Not all their songs on the album fall under the genre. That's one of the tricky things with this genre. You've got bands who can have multiple genres going on their album, and grunge is just happens to be one of them that they get classified under.
Yep. And that's the problem with trying to put people into, a single box, because certain bands have a really wide style variety. They're really classic over here, or they're really, edgy over there, but they might have a whole lot of different things. So you don't want to tuck them into one box. That's the problem.
Yeah, yeah, and as I was looking, I ended up going with this video because again, I had a tough time actually finding anybody who went into, what are the qualities of grunge, which again, a lot of debate out there about what makes something grungy. And usually, anybody who tries to explain it tends to reference a certain band. They either go the Alice in Chains route, or God forbid you say Stone Temple Pilot, because you will end up getting in a fight with some of the people in here about, like, oh, is STP grunge or not? And I've had the debate over the last week. So it's an interesting genre to to come to agreements on. But what I decided to go with here, something I had not heard of before, shoegaze. That is a new term for me. Apparently, it's a genre. And this one's coming from at Stained Glass Stories. And he got this idea to put together this series of this genre versus that genre from another channel that had utilized it for uh, different things, non-musical. But he said, this would be a fun format to make a musical channel about. And I like this idea of two similar genres that I guess came out around the same time. And just like there's debate over what is grunge and where it comes from, because yeah, most assume it, like me, the Seattle sound was, and Nirvana, and we have these certain assumptions and conclusions we go to. But now we look back after the fact on the genre, and it starts to define itself better. You can now see post grunge, just like we were talking about, with post punk and some of these other genres. This is one of them where the genre was kind of defined by the decade. And post grunge is technically anything after 2000 that might sound a little grungy or come from bands that were grungy at one point, but now they're not. So, getting to understand where this genre fits in the times, a counter genre that kind of walked along with it, I think will help a little bit to understand where grunge fits into everything.
Nice.
So I'm going to learn what shoegaze is while I finally get explained what grunge is, because I've been told I have no idea. And I'm not even going to argue that I have an idea. I mean, I listened to it, I enjoyed a lot of it, but it's hard to be an expert in this genre because it has such variance in opinions. Let's see, shoegaze and grunge compared.
Shoegaze and grunge, two genres of music that emerged in the late 1980s and have stylistic origins from alternative rock. At first glance, it may seem like there are only some minor differences between the two genres. When looking into the dichotomy between the two genres further, I became more intrigued by the differences between them, so today I'll be comparing the two genres, discussing their origins, musical qualities, and key influencers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I got this idea from a YouTuber called Mr. B. As a history video producer who has an excellent series that compares two different cities, states, or nations, I thought it would be interesting to apply this dynamic to two different genres of music. I recommend checking his channel out if you are like me and love learning about history. Alright, without further ado, let's begin. Shoegaze's music origins can be traced back to genres such as indie rock, alternative rock, dream pop, psychedelic rock, and post-punk. Some groups that had a crucial influence on the genre include Husker Du, Dinosaur Jr., A.R. Kane, and the Jesus and Mary Chain. While all of these groups are prominent in the 1980s, influences on shoegaze can also be found in the reverberation of 1960s wall of sound. Musical origins of grunge can be identified in genres like punk rock, alternative rock, heavy metal, and noise rock. Groups such as Sonic Youth, Melvins, Mudhoney, Pixies, Black Sabbath, and Again Dinosaur Jr. were all influential to the grunge sound. Neil Young has even been called the godfather of grunge for releasing two albums in 1979 and 1990 that have now been classified as proto-grunge. The term shoegaze originates from the publication Sound and NME. It was based on the tendency for guitarists to be looking downwards staring at effects pedals during their gigs. However, some musicians who were classified as shoegaze artists found the term to be a pejorative, most notably Mickey Berenyi of Lush. Grunge is a term that has been used to describe bands dating back to the 1960s and is slang for dirt, or something that is repugnant. The word would later become associated with the sludgy sound of the American Pacific Northwest. Similar to shoegaze, there are a lot of prominent musicians classified as grunge that loathe the term, most notably Kurt Cobain. In terms of location, shoegaze originated mostly from the United Kingdom and Ireland, whereas grunge originated mostly from Seattle, Washington. Shoegaze music isn't exactly known for its lyricism. One key feature with many shoegaze songs is the de-emphasis on vocals, treating the voice as another instrument in overwhelming waves of sound. Oftentimes, lyrics are difficult to hear and are sometimes speculated to be completely random or meaningless. When lyrics can be made out, themes of melancholia, introspection, and sentimentality can be observed. On the other hand, themes and lyricism play an essential role in grunge music. Lyrics tend to be easier to make out when listening to grunge and often invoke themes including nihilism, angst, derangement, and desire for freedom. The sound of both shoegaze and grunge music can be characterized by overwhelmingly loud and reverberated guitars. However, between the two genres, this distortion manifests itself in different ways. In shoegaze, instrumentation blends together, oftentimes creating a swirling or droning texture. Oftentimes, guitar pedals or the vibrato arm on the guitar are used to bend sound. The Fender Jazzmaster is the preferred guitar for many shoegazers due to the ability to move the vibrato arm while strumming. As explained earlier, vocals often become part of the wash of sound. However, in some cases, vocals are juxtaposed with the distortion, sounding pristine or even gentle. Grunge has much more of a lo-fi or raw sound to it. It is much easier to distinguish between the guitar and bass, and vocals can be more clearly heard. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that lyrics are necessarily easier to make out, as many grunge singers had a slurred or growling vocal style. The dissonant power chord is often employed in conjunction with powerful amplifiers to create kind of a sludgy texture. Oftentimes, guitars are downtuned to create a feeling of darkness, which may be enhanced with a ponderous or sinister bass line. While there are countless excellent shoegaze and grunge bands out there that deserve to be listened to, I've selected 3 influential bands to represent each genre. My Bloody Valentine is arguably the most influential shoegaze band, releasing Loveless in 1991, one of the most celebrated albums of the 1990s. Known for their androgynous vocals and frontman Kevin Shields' popularization of tremolo pitch bending, Shields was known to have used more than 30 guitar pedals to create unique soundscapes. Slowdive tends to be a bit less fuzzy than My Bloody Valentine, with lyrics that sound crystalline. Their most influential album is probably Souvlaki, released in 1993. It has a beautifully mellow and dreamy sound to it. Ride is another pioneering shoegaze band. Their take on shoegaze tends to be noisier and more psychedelic than MBV or Slowdive, which can be heard in their debut 1990 record Nowhere. In grunge music, Nirvana is probably the most popular band. Releasing Nevermind in 1991, the same year as Loveless, the album was a cornerstone of the grunge genre. Notable for often following a quiet, loud, quiet dynamic between verses and choruses, one can hear that Nirvana's influences are rooted in punk. Alice in Chains is another prominent grunge group, and they definitely have a heavier sound when compared to Nirvana. One can tell that their influences are in heavy metal and occasionally the blues. Their most acclaimed release was the 1992 album Dirt. Then there is Soundgarden, who oftentimes fuses grunge with alternative rock and occasionally stoner rock. Their 1994 album Super Unknown is probably their most commemorated release.
Black hole sun, won't you come?
As sort of an honorable mention, the band Swerve Driver really had one foot in the shoegaze camp while having the other foot in grunge. While they are probably closer to shoegaze than they are to grunge, they really do create a unique fusion, especially in their 1993 album Mezcal Head. One stark contrast between the two genres can be observed when examining commercial success. Shoegaze wasn't nearly as popular as grunge. For example, Loveless only peaked at number 24 on the UK album charts, while Nevermind peaked at number 7. Loveless didn't even chart in the United States, while Nevermind was a number 1 album there. Grunge music kind of developed its own subculture and fashion. Both shoegaze and grunge had relatively brief periods of success, with the former probably being slightly shorter than the latter. Shoegaze was most popular in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but was quickly pushed aside by both grunge and Britpop. Grunge, on the other hand, was most popular between the early to mid-1990s, but would fizzle out after bands like Soundgarden and Screaming Trees went on hiatus from releasing records and Kurt Cobain's suicide. Each genre has experienced some sort of revival after their initial decline. Shoegaze began to re-emerge in the late 2000s and early 2010s, and has continued to maintain a consistent audience ever since. If you look into the website Rate Your Music, you'll see that there have already been 101 shoegaze albums released in 2022, and we are only a quarter into the year. I hope we will continue to see this trend in the future. Grunge, by comparison, re-emerged more quickly than shoegaze did. Post-grunge emerged in the late 1990s and early 2000s, but kind of faded in popularity by the late 2000s. However, groups like Foo Fighters and Live continued to be popular. Since I brought up Foo Fighters, I just want to say rest in peace Taylor Hawkins. He was truly one of the greatest drummers of all time. It probably won't surprise anyone to hear that I'm definitely more of a shoegaze fan, but I do appreciate and enjoy grunge as well. Since most of my videos cover shoegaze bands, I'm sure most of my audience enjoys shoegaze music more as well. However, I am curious in the comments to see which genre you enjoy more and why. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell for more shoegaze content. Thank you for watching the video.
Oh, and we did subscribe to the channel, and I am now a fan of shoegaze. I will be checking out some of these recommendations. This one was a new one for me. I was familiar with grunge. I didn't know the other stuff was called something else and came from Britain.
There you go. You learned something new today. That's why we're here on a Thursday.
Yeah, that's one of the cool parts of our job at Stained Glass Stories. Thank you for introducing me to the other side of the 90s.
Indeed. We made
And
it.
and you know, it does go to show you like location sometimes can be the difference between one genre and another, and whether it comes from across the pond versus, you know, the West Coast.
Yep. Makes, popular in different areas. I'm right here
Well,
by New York City, and that's like, a whole different bubble than other places for sure.
yeah, and sound wise, you know, they do have similar sounds. They might sing or talk about slightly different things. And this kind of reminds me of like the differences between certain metal genres or certain hip hop genres where, you know, the music isn't really that different between the genres, but the topics and the themes are. And that's that's why I guess some of these ones that I've been seeing, people are like, "Oh no, that's not grunge, that's emo," and I'm like, "Well, okay, I guess it's all about the topic at that point."
Yeah, and to me, arguments about which box to put things in is also just kind of silly. It's like, do you like the song? Do you not like the song? Talk about elements of the song. Don't talk about which box to put the song in.
Well, and isn't it funny that some of the artists that get called these things don't always like the box you put them in?
Yep,
So
exactly.
go figure. Kurt was like, "Don't call us grunge."
Yeah.
Like, shocker.
He wants his own
They
box.
they don't like the names you're calling them.
Yep, exactly. And that's another reason to either don't put them in a box or ask the artist which box they want to be in. Maybe they don't want a box, and maybe they want to be in a specific box. Who knows?
Well, and that goes to the point I make sometimes where the artists don't always get the luxury of defining themselves.
Yep.
The listeners and the audience also have a say in all of that. So, you know, an artist can come out all day saying like, I'm this. And if the audience says no, you're that, you can argue against your audience, but you can't say that they're wrong. Like, especially if it's the mass audience, because they do tend to decide in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones supporting you for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and music history is written over time. It's not written instantly overnight. I mean, once in a while you do get those instant classics, those instant hits. But for the most part, the history gets written throughout the decades.
Some of my favorites are the accidental hits, the ones where, like, whether it was a throwaway song or somebody was like, "Oh, you want me to write a love song? Fine." And like they sat down and they wrote something real quick and it became like the best love song ever or whatever, that kind of thing. I love those kind of stories.
You know, there is one channel that I go to like almost nightly, the Professor of Rock, and I want to give him a special shout out right now because I always love his videos. He's a historian of musical knowledge and facts like no other channel, and he does a lot of those. Like he'll have an episode on a song that the artist absolutely hated and refused to do, but the record company forced him to do it, and it turned out to be the best hit song of all time. And like there's these constant stories of you know, those situations where it's like something that you knew one way, it turns out there's this backstory to it that I love that we now have like the YouTube that we have and the historians that we have, and I get to find out about things that like I just assumed, oh, that was a good song and they must have loved doing it because they made $1 million.
And you could barely pay them to do it. You barely drag them on stage to do it by the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Or in a few of them that I've watched over the past couple of months, they did it on a dare. They did it because they were told it wasn't going to work, and I love those stories the most because it's that rebellious attitude of like, don't tell me that it won't work. It was like when you remember when Jake made that cliche love song. We had that evening where
That was
where
great.
we talked about like how to make a love song, and the whole evening it was like don't use cliches. And like they said, don't do this, don't do this. This is the worst way to write a love song. At the end of the episode, Jake came out and said, you know what? I'm going to do everything that they said not to do, and I'm going to write a hit song. And he did.
Yeah, he did. That's right. That was awesome. I love that song.
So for those of you out there that are sure that like you can break the rules, if you do understand the general rules, and that's what a lot of this tonight was all about. It wasn't saying like you got to do this in order to be punk or you got to do this in order to be grunge. It's all observation. It's realizing the recipe that these genres do have, and then coming up with a way to creatively either duplicate the recipe or find a mystery ingredient that gives it a whole new flavor.
Yeah, and recipe is a good way to look at it because it's, you know, it's a framework. You know, you use these guidelines. These are the main components you got to throw in there, but how you arrange it all and how much of this and how much of that, and how much spice, all that's all up to you.
Yeah, and then we've heard the term spice in the music world in many conversations, whether it's the mixing or it's the writing.
Exactly.
So we will be back next Thursday with more spice talk. Tomorrow we're going to be finishing up on preparing for round 2 with the WAG. We're going to be looking at some more interviews and some of the progress that round 2 that they're making. We're getting ready for Saturday where the submissions are going to come in. So Saturday, we're going to have some new songs that we're going to have a listening party for. We're going to take a listen to the 4 mashups, which is going to give us 8 songs to go through. And we're going to have another week where I get to judge again.
Yes, indeed.
And hopefully if any of the contestants get a chance to catch tonight's episode, some of these tips will help them to get their stuff ready. Because as a judge, a lot of these things they talk about here for criteria, that's what some of our judges are really paying attention to.
Yep. And they got to look for the right ingredients.
Yep. And you'll know if I taste something that I don't like because I'll make a stinky face.
Oh, not that. What did you do?
You don't want me to make a stinky face.
No, for sure. So put all the right ingredients.
Yep. So thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow night at 9 with a little more on the WAG.
And then we'll see you next week on Talking Shhh I.T. Glenn and Tony. See you.
Good night, everyone.
We cover digital audio workstations and music tools. We explore theory, gear in 82. How to write and compose and the art of arranging. Taking a look at AI and how the times have changed. On a PC or a Mac and even with a mobile device. We'll be talking about it all every Thursday night. From software to plugins and synths that entice. Dive deep into tech and let creativity take flight. Talking I.T. We're talking I.T. Come and join in and have some fun. It's highly educational with a lot to learn. From bedroom producers to seasoned pros, we're breaking it down so knowledge grows. Whether you're a DJ or a beat making wizard, we got the tips and tricks to make your sound sizzle. Mixing and mastering, that's our jam. With the tutorials and tips on how much rev. Get the best quality from your setup and gear. Tune in every week and lend us your ear. We're talking I.T. Come and join in and have some fun. It's highly educational with a lot to learn. We're talking